Welcome to the Six Hats podcast, where I, Dr. Shami, a lifestyle and nutritional medicine family doctor, will talk about how women strive to find balance each day by juggling their six roles, being a woman, mother, daughter, partner, business owner, and professional. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Six Hats podcast. And today we will be uncovering the hidden health hazards in your home and empower you to create a space that truly supports your well-being. So join Nicole Bijlsma, Australia's leading expert in building biology and environmental health, as she shares groundbreaking research, expert insights, and practical tips to help you and your family thrive. So welcome, Nicole.
Thank you, Shami. Always love to talk about my passion, that's for sure.
Amazing. So I'm going to start with the first question. So could your home be making you sick? So from mold to hidden toxins, what are the biggest culprits in our everyday environments, and how can we start making simple changes today?
Well, yes, I do think our home is making a significant proportion of people sick with hazards that they can't see, they can't smell. It certainly did for me with my 10 miscarriages and sleep disturbances. And that's how I got into it, starting to look at my own health and my patients with asthma, allergies, long-term fatiguing syndrome, and then realizing, 30 years down the track was probably mold. But absolutely, we've had a significant escalation in preventable chronic diseases since the mid-80s, namely neurodevelopmental disorders like ASD and, of course, ADHD, as well as at the other end of the scale, degenerative disorders like Parkinson's and dementia, and everything in between, including breast cancers and other things like that. So a huge, when you start looking at the stats, you can see the mid-80s was a very important pivotal moment for many of the preventable chronic diseases. And of course, we know risk factors like obesity and smoking and, air pollution are really important risk factors. But there are also many other factors you cannot see that are often in your home where you spend most of your time that could have dramatic impacts on your health, and often one of the last things to be identified, if at all.
Wow, that's incredible. I was blown away by what you said about your health journey, and you dived into it and you were doing the research. And I've actually forgot to mention in your intro that you're a naturopath. Is that right, Nicole? Your background is naturopathy and acupuncture. Is that what yeah.
Yes, I was a formal naturopath and acupuncturist and practiced for 15 years prior to having my children. And during that time, had a crisis really 5 years into my work and thinking, I'm treating symptoms with bioceuticals and herbs. And whilst it did improve, and look, improving anyone's diet is generally going to improve their health overall, and that's an important thing to do. And I'm glad to see this shift to an awareness of food as medicine, because it really is an important part of well-being. However, what's often missed is sleep disturbances. Sleep is the hallmark for health, and we are in a sleep crisis. The latest parliamentary inquiry in Australia indicated 40% of adults don't sleep well, which was difficult when I did my randomized controlled trial crossover pilot study that I published last year, finding adults that sleep during the night that aren't overweight, that aren't pre or post menopause, etc. There's a lot of exclusion criteria. But generally, for sure, there's a lot going on in our homes that could be contributing to a significant proportion of chronic diseases. And I've mentioned neurodevelopmental disorders and Parkinson's. I mean, if I look at that cohort, I'm looking at pesticides come up time and time again in the literature as significant potential risk factors for both of those conditions. So you're seeing your organophosphates, your previously organochlorine pesticides, many of them, the insecticides work on the same body as they do on the insect in terms of blocking acetylcholinesterase. So the mechanism of action is the same. Things like paraquat, for example, and rotenone have been banned in most countries but reapproved in Australia and the US of recent, even though they give these chemicals to cause Parkinson's in rodents in order to test drugs on them. So, I mean, what's happening, and unpacking this over the last 30 years, and of course doing my PhD on environmental chemicals and EMFs, and the lack of regulation and conflict of interest with industry setting standards and public health policies, I've become very cynical as I get older. Public health is largely a misnomer because so much of what you purchase in the stores, etc., has not been adequately tested and may not even have exposure standards.
Wow. There's so much to unpack here, and I know we've only got like half an hour, but I'd love to go. If you walk through your home, if we could walk through the home of listeners, what do we need to be aware of? And then we can dive deeper in a bit later. For example, you've mentioned pesticides. What else do we need to be aware of?
Well, the first thing is pesticides is that you may be living within 1.5 kilometres of a golf course or a farm with crop dusting, which means you're going to have potentially elevated levels of organophosphates in your body. A very good friend of mine who was a naturopath in Sydney, organic diet for over 20 years, vegetarian, when she tested her and her kids, though, it was exceedingly high because they live within a block of the golf course. So there are things that are in close proximity to your house that aren't even in your house or getting into your house that most patients have no awareness of, and we call these exposure zones where they are exposed. So flight paths are a big one. If you live within 7 kilometres of a flight path, you will be exposed to elevated particulate matter, noxious gases like carbon monoxide, and of course VOCs. Mining, open cut mines within 70 kilometres of an open cut mine, you'll be exposed to more toxic metals and particulate matter. So even where you live is the start of what you're being exposed to. But going into the house, the main thing I'm looking for in the house is that it's clean and dry. A house that is wet, as in has moisture-related issues, such as a pipe leak or drainage issues where there's moisture for more than 48 hours will support microbial growth. So that leak in the shower when the membranes are compromised because, it's 30 years old or may not even have membranes there, and the symptoms. I'm really mapping the symptoms with what I'm seeing in a visual inspection and also testing in the house to identify what the hazards are. But without doubt, mold would be the number one reason why people get us building biologists out to test. And what we're looking for is particular symptoms that we know we would expect in water damaged homes. And they would be things like asthma, allergies, hay fever, and all the itises: sinusitis, pharyngitis, rhinitis, bronchitis, laryngitis, recurrent colds and flus that are persistent and keep coming back. Most kids we know will have a few colds and flus for the year, but get over it quickly. It's when it's persistent and drags on for weeks or months and it's not responsive to treatment that I start thinking there could be a water issue either in their school, their home, or even their car.
Wow. And this is a question, I'm just sidetracking a bit. I know we probably need a whole session on mold, but I did have a patient who exactly had that. And we did eventually test for mold and it was positive. But what we realized is he had mold exposure 2 to 3 years ago and then moved house. So can those symptoms persist, or do we need to dive deeper into his current house where he doesn't think there's moisture?
That's a great question. There's two things. Did he bring his water damaged furnishings into the next house and keep contaminating himself? Especially mattresses and sofas are a big, big problem if they were in previously water damaged homes. Secondly, the way in which the body removes fungal particulate is through the bile, but because 90% is reabsorbed through the hepatocirculation, the problem is intrahepatic circulation. The problem is that it keeps being reabsorbed. So you have to break that cycle, which is why binders is considered to be one of the most important treatments. The catch-22 with binders is they can result in malnutrition because they're binding to especially your fat-soluble vitamins, etc. So they're not a long-term solution, but definitely helpful in the short term, and often the reason why clients may continue to be sick even when they're in a healthy home.
Oh, wow. That's really, really good information. I'm going to move on to my favorite topic, which is actually EMFs, electromagnetic fields, because when I mention it to my patients, it's almost like a completely new topic because we're living in an environment where we're addicted. We're literally attached to our phones. Every building has Wi-Fi. People sleep with their phones next to them, and we actually underestimate the impact it has. So I can't wait for us to discuss this, Nicole.
I'm glad to hear you say that because that's pretty rare in an interview that someone is passionate about EMFs. I am, but that ends up me yelling at my kids pretty much on a daily basis to get their Bluetooth out of their ears or to get the phone out of their bedrooms before they go to bed. I'm yelling,
Oh, wow. So let's explore this. The electromagnetic fields, it's invisible. It's so invisible. And I loved what you mentioned about those Bluetooth earbuds. Oh, it drives me crazy to watch people. Literally, it's radiation, isn't it?
Absolutely. So basically, it's a non-ionizing form of radiation, which is why it's largely been ignored for so many years because it's not an ionizing form of radiation that can directly cause single DNA strand breaks. However, we know the mechanism of action by which radio frequencies, which is emitted from all your Wi-Fi enabled devices and your cell phones, may cause impact at a cellular level. And the major area is suppression of melatonin, which of course is your most important neuropeptide as an anti-cancer. So if we're looking at why on earth cancer is accelerated in young people, this may explain one of them. A lot of our lighting, of course, is emitting RF, and our Wi-Fi and our smart homes, but all of these devices is literally tricking the body into thinking it's daytime instead of nighttime. So blue light suppressing melatonin. The other mechanism is radio frequencies affecting non-REM sleep, which is what my study showed, which was statistically significant, but also it accelerates oxidative stress and low-grade systemic inflammation. So this oxidative stress, of course, is where we know most chronic diseases end up, is this, free radicals, oxidative stress, low-grade systemic inflammation that won't be picked up with CRP or an FBE, but you will find symptoms indicating a slow degradation of the central nervous system, resulting in symptoms like headaches, long-term fatigue that's not alleviated by rest. Sleep disturbances is one of the major symptoms of all environmental sensitivities, but especially electromagnetic field exposures. And from my experience, what I find is people can dramatically increase their EHS, or electromagnetic hypersensitivity, if they're working on a workstation where they have an extender or booster or router within 4 wavelengths. So if it's on their desk or in close proximity of their desk, they're in the near field, which is what seems to be causing a lot more of the biological effects, or sleeping next to the smart meter, which can result in exposures to magnetic fields as well as radio frequencies. So to me, sleep disturbances, it's the number one cause of sleep disturbances from my experience. And that's why I decided in my research to test the impact of a baby monitor on healthy adult sleep, because it emits more radiation, as about similar to an extender, booster and router. And I find kids don't sleep very well with baby monitors very well. And as a result of this, I decided to do that research, which was the first in the world to be done in a real world scenario in patients' homes.
That is incredible. And I think they actually repeat that baby monitors emit the EMF and that actually disrupts their sleep.
It's a shocker. The level of radiation emitted from many of these baby monitors is equivalent to what we'd find from the highest readings, like such as a router or extender. And when I'm going in and testing people's homes, often that baby isn't sleeping, and they may even be at the mother baby unit on and off, and suddenly they're better in hospital and now they're not so good at home. Just relocating the cot, using something else instead of the baby monitor, such as hardwired CCTV, or not using a baby monitor. Like the majority of clients I see, I'm not sure why they would use a baby monitor, why we need to hear them breathing or watch them unless they're at risk of SIDS. But I know I certainly couldn't do that with my 3 under 3. I had to sleep at least an hour and a half between feeds. But yes, baby monitors do emit quite high levels of radio frequencies, and because it's designed to be in the bedroom of both, obviously, the baby and, of course, the parent's bedroom as well. That's why I ended up doing that research.
Amazing. I do want to mention, what about microwaves? And I've got another device I'm going to mention.
So microwaves, of course, they are heating. So they're higher up the electromagnetic spectrum. They use microwave technology, which is still within the radio frequency band, and it's heating. So the power output is a lot higher. The issue I have with microwaves is, look, if you're within half a meter of a microwave when it's on, that's not ideal, but it's just episodic high levels. The issues I have is the use of Wi-Fi enabled devices in the bedroom during an 8-hour period. That's where you're going to get more of the biological effects. The thing with microwave ovens that concern me is the fact that they destroy any natural bacteria on the plants. And of course, we know that the natural bacteria on organic or biodynamic food is probably just as important as whatever nutrients are in the food, because it programs the gut microbiome on how to digest it. And that was interesting research in Japan with nori and seaweed, how bacteria inherent within the food programs the bacteria in the gut on what enzymes to release to digest it. So by sterilizing food, which is essentially what you're doing in a microwave, you're killing off whatever vitality is in it. And that's the issue I have with that, not so much exposure to EMFs.
Amazing. What about Apple Watches?
Look, any Wi-Fi enabled device, and this is the interesting thing with my research, is I looked at heart rate variability, and whilst it wasn't statistically significant, it was reaching statistical significance. So if we had more participants in the study, I would have shown that the baby monitor or a Wi-Fi enabled device could actually affect heart rate variability. So the very thing we're monitoring, heart rate variability, might be impacted by the radiation emitted from these devices, and that would have been quite newsworthy, but I didn't have enough participants to be able to demonstrate that.
Which kind of makes me think about the Aura rings and other ways of monitoring sleep. Is that right? Am I on the right path? Because isn't that Bluetooth? Isn't that Wi-Fi?
Yes, so Aura rings will measure oximetry or oxygen blood flow in the fingers in terms of heart rate variability, and it's not as effective as actually having electrodes on the chest, which is why I couldn't measure heart rate variability with those devices. A, because they're emitting. You can use them without emitting it and then download the data. So that's the good thing about these devices. I think helping people understand and quantifying their health is a good thing because it changes behaviour, as long as it's in, it's not emitting RF during the nighttime, which I believe these devices, you can turn that functionality off. However, from my research, I had to use electrodes to measure heart rate variability. It's far more accurate than measuring blood flow through fingers in terms of heart rate variability, and I don't think I would have been able to publish it in the journals had I used that method.
Amazing. Amazing. So if we could just make 3 changes today for a healthier home, what would they be, Nicole? What would you pick your top 3?
Oh, gosh, there's a few, but the main thing is to keep it dry. As soon as you have liquid water or high water vapor, like relative humidity above 70% for more than 48 hours, you're going to have microbial growth. Mold is everywhere and on everything. That's not the problem. It's when it's present with moisture for more than 48 hours that supports growth and the release of fungal structures like spores and hyphae, which have mycotoxins on them that when you breathe can actually elicit adverse health effects. So, check your drainage, check your roof leaks, check under your cupboards that your flex hoses are in good condition, because that's the number one cause of insurance claims for water events in Australia. That would be my big tip. And try and reduce the dust load. The dust is where all your allergens are. Dust mite, of course, is the most common allergy in the world, affects 20% of the world's population, but it's also where the mold spores, the hyphae, the flame retardants, the solvents, the phthalates, the personal care products, the asbestos, the pest, frass, everything. It's the archaeological dig site of the entire house. So how you manage dust will determine how much load, the load of chemicals and allergens you're exposed to. So for me, knowing this and having kids with eczema and dust mite allergies, I rip the carpets out and have rugs that I can put outside and beat and expose to the sun, which is far more effective as a cleaning agent than pretty much any other solvent.
Amazing. And the third one would be something to do with EMF?
Look, definitely EMFs, but we've covered that. So no EMF devices in the bedroom or adjacent rooms. The next one would be a water filter. A water filter is critical for human health. I find it ironic, and this is part of my crisis as a naturopath 5 years in, was why am I prescribing a $40 probiotic and allowing my patient to drink it with chlorinated water to kill half of it on the way down? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. So water filtration is really important. I'd say air filters are also important, especially with the amount of bushfire smoke that we're exposed to, which is very carcinogenic. So definitely get a filter or your body becomes that filter.
Amazing. Amazing podcast, Nicole. We have to invite you back. Oh my God, it's just packed with so much information. I can't thank you enough for giving your time today.
Very welcome. Thank you.
Excellent. Remember that this is general advice only. Please see your healthcare professional for more information. So what's your take-home message today? Remember, it's all about progress and not perfection. And are you suffering from stress? Visit the Usawa Learning Hub on usawa.com.au for more resources on how to de-stress, re-energize, and reclaim your health. Enjoy the journey.